Hello and welcome into this edition of the Golf Channel Podcast with Rex and Lav. It seems the perfect chaser to your July 4th barbecues will be some sweet, sweet action at the John Deere Classic. Jordan Spieth is the headliner. Sepp Straka is the defending champion. Patrick Cantlay is the week of withdrawal after saying he sustained a minor injury last week. Rex, what has caught your eye during this holiday week?
Well, happy 4th of July to everyone. This feels like a Tuesday edition of the Wednesday podcast, if we're being completely upfront on this one, because you are gallivanting away with your family. Where are you spending the 4th of July?
We always go up to Reynolds, Lake Oconee. More on that. At the end of this podcast, we'll be trotting out some new technology that I've been monkeying around with.
I was a little thrown. You actually sent me a text message, asked what the topics were for this week's podcast. And I don't think we've ever done that in a couple of years of doing the podcast. But as you're about to show the fine folks, you wanted to be a little bit more organized. So we've got some new bells and whistles for this podcast, starting with the topic bar, which is going to be Jordan Spieth, if I'm not mistaken, playing this week at the John Deere Classic. There it is. What's wrong with Jordan? Very good. Look at you. Very proud of yourself. On cue. What's wrong with Jordan? I don't know that anything's wrong with Jordan now that hasn't been wrong with him the last 2, 3, I don't know. How far back do you want to go? It seems like he makes a step forward and then takes 2 steps back in his game. And this is Jordan being maximum Jordan, because you go back just a few weeks ago and it seemed like he had turned some sort of corner, at least with his game, with his swing, that he was starting to look like the Jordan of old. But now the results just aren't there. And it seems to me he's kind of searching. I know we're going to sort of break down the idea that we're getting towards the end of the regular season. We're going to sort of look at some players that need to have a big finish to not only get into the playoffs, but secure their spot inside the top 50. That gets him in the signature events next year. Jordan's going to be in that category. He's got to get something going. This is a good week for him. He's obviously got good vibes, having won at TPC. And I think he has the ability to. I just don't know where his game is, because it's impossible to see any trends when it comes to Jordan. Of all the top players in the game, he has to be the most inconsistent.
Yeah, I think we have a pretty good idea of where his game is, and it's not very good at the moment. 9 consecutive tournaments now outside the top 25. That's dating all the way back to early April. It's wild to see him in what is a very weak John Deere Classic field with worse odds this week than Sungjae Im, Sepp Straka, and last week's chief contender Aaron Rai. It's the first time that Jordan Spieth has played at the John Deere Classic since 2015. I think that's an indication, Rex, of just how much he is searching, just how much he is in desperate need of some sort of confidence. Certainly a boost in FedExCup points to get back inside the top 50, for which he is currently outside. It's been a strange downturn in form, because I guarantee if you queued up our podcast from January or early February, when Jordan Spieth had top 6 finishes at both Kapalua and the Phoenix Open, like I think both of us were pretty encouraged that, hey, Jordan Spieth might be on the right track now. Seems like he's got his swing in a good space. Instead, it has gone the absolute opposite direction. It's hard to know how much of Spieth's struggles can be pinned down to the lingering wrist issue that he has in his left wrist, because he has not been very forthright about it. He said that he has the issue is manageable, and yet he also in the same breath says that he doesn't quite know when it's going to pop up, how long it's going to sort of set him back. It is weird though, Rex, that Jordan's having his best driving year in a decade, and yet his approach play has completely fallen off. So I don't think it's as easily pinned down to his wrist issue as maybe we wanted it to be.
You said pop up. I think pop out is the better way of putting it when it comes to the wrist, because I think we talked about this earlier in the season. The idea that one swing can leave him with essentially a wrist that doesn't work for golf anymore. And it takes him a couple of days to recover. I think he talked about the Players' Championship, it happening then, and he wasn't able to recover. I believe he ended up missing the cut there. That's how easily it can turn. And look, this is probably something that needs to be addressed in the offseason, either through surgery or some other means, because clearly it's on his mind. Clearly it's impacting his game. I was just looking at his stats. You're right. Like his ball striking, his approach to the green, it's just falling off the end of the world. He's losing almost 0.1 strokes to the field with his iron play, which is unbelievable. He's 112th on the PGA Tour, and his putting's hardly not any better. He's 80th on the PGA Tour in strokes gained putting. So those are very un-Jordan Spieth-esque qualities. When you look at when he's playing his best golf, He's being able to do it with his iron play. He's being able to do it with his putting. And you're right. There is some irony that his tee game is actually halfway decent right now compared to the rest of the game. But it has to be as a risk. Of all the things you look at, and again, this goes back to my argument that I always make. You can lose your confidence. You can lose your health, but you don't lose the talent. And he's still a very talented player, but he certainly hasn't shown it this season.
Yeah, if you look at the greatest indicator for success on the PGA Tour, it is the players who perform the best in strokes gained approach. And the fact that Jordan Spieth is losing strokes with his approach, but the fact that he is outside the top 100, 110th in strokes gained approach, that would be his worst season with his irons since 2018-19, when he was really sort of in the throes of his slump there. I think most curiously, we always sort of think of Jordan Spieth as the preeminent wedge player on the PGA Tour, whether he's holing out, whether he's getting it close, whether he's making sort of his birdie runs. He's outside the top 120 in wedge distance. He's outside the top 100 from long range too. So he's not hitting his long irons well. He's not hitting his short clubs well. And if you add that to the fact that he's not mopping up on those 15 to 25 footers like he was in his heyday, you have a recipe for some pretty mediocre results. I think it's safe to say, Rex, that we're at this point now where Jordan's results no longer match his reputation. This is a 13-time winner on the PGA Tour. This is a 3-time major champion. But since 2017, when he won the Open Championship, he has just 2 wins. One of those came the week before the Masters back in 2019. 2021, the Valero Texas Open, a field that did not have all the best players because everyone's getting ready for Augusta National. Another one came at Harbortown, when, if you recall, he got in early, a bunch of weird things happened, and that was before it was a signature event on the PGA Tour. He does not have like a marquee victory on the PGA Tour in 7 years now, and he's not a particular threat in the major championships either. I gave him a lot of credit a couple years ago when he stuck with sort of his main crew, with caddy Michael Greller. He kept his agent, Jay Danzy. He kept his swing coach, Cameron McCormick, even though he started poking around some other avenues. I do wonder if Jordan Spieth ends this season and he doesn't pin his struggles solely on his wrist injury, if he thinks about going another direction for sort of the second act of his career. He's 30 years old now. He's clearly not the same player he was in his early to mid 20s. Do you think that it's time for Spieth to sort of find a spark in his game, even if it comes at the expense of his camp?
I'm never comfortable firing people, certainly not swing coaches or caddies or agents or anyone else, because I feel like you never really know what's going on deep. It's not down in a player's heart. I'm going to pin this all on injury at this point because I don't really have an alternative, because you're right. He could probably experiment a little bit. And my understanding, if I remember correctly, he went to Butch and did some work with him, if I remember correctly. And I think that probably just solidified in his mind that him and Cam McCormick are working on the right things. I don't think it's very complicated when it comes to Jordan's swing. He's never going to be confused for Scotty Scheffler or one of the game's best ball strikers, even when he was playing his best.
No, when he was playing his best back in 2017, he was the second best iron player on the PGA Tour.
Absolutely.
He just so happened to coincide that with very timely putting from 15 to 25 feet.
Yes, exactly. And I'm trying to remember back to wherever it was. It might have been at the Players one year where you were watching him on the range, or maybe at the Open Championship. And I think your line then was, I have never seen a professional player look so lost and so frustrated, and he's hitting it all over the lot. Again, this goes back to the idea that he can be a world-class player, multi-time major winner, former world number one, all the accolades we want to throw on him. But when you put him on the range on the wrong day, he looks like a 6 handicap who's having a bad day on the range, and he's just clunking it around. It sounds different. I don't know if it's different now than maybe it was when he was, quote unquote, in his prime. I think the difference now is the inconsistencies come more often. And again, it's why I'm going to go back and lean into the idea that I truly believe that this is injury related. We're going to have a conversation here about Will Zalatoris in a moment. And I think Tiger Woods is the primary example when you talk about this. Tiger Woods, if he could just get healthy for an extended period of time, 6 months, whatever that might be, if he can just get healthy, then I truly believe Tiger Woods can go back to some former version of himself. The problem is he can't do it long enough to put in the sustained time. I think it's very, very similar when it comes to Jordan Spieth, at least when it comes to being on the golf course and trying to be competitive as he can. We're having this conversation, and he's just 53rd on the FedExCup. So yes, he's on the outside of that top 50 bubble, but just barely. So it's not as though he's fallen off the map. He's just not playing the way we're expecting Jordan Spieth to play.
Yeah, he hasn't played the past 3 months particularly well. It's just such a stark departure to how he began the year that began so auspiciously. And now we're at this point where he needs to at least make up some ground to get into the signature event series in the top 50 for next year. If you are a Jordan Spieth fan, perhaps a sign of optimism, Rex, at the Open Championship. That has been his best major over the past 5 or 6 years. 6 consecutive top 25 finishes, including that close call a couple years ago at Royal St. George's to Colin Morikawa. You mentioned Will Zalatoris. I would put him in the same sort of category of players who I think are pretty mindful now of what their FedExCup playoff positioning is looking like as we get down to the end of the regular season. Spieth is certainly a player who's outside the top 50. Will Zalatoris is 38th after the withdrawal last week at the Rocket Mortgage Classic, where he was on the brink of contention. PJ Tour said it was a back issue. He told CBS's Amanda Balionis it instead was a hip issue. You look at Willie Z, he's 38th, but like a player like a Minwoo Lee is 55th. Eric Van Rooyen, a winner last year, the subject of one of my features this year, is 53rd. You go down, Spieth is 59th. What has sort of caught your eye on those players? Adam Scott, 69th, almost not eligible for the first playoff event as well. So a couple weeks remaining in the regular season, but this is a prime opportunity for some of the tour's middle class to solidify their standing.
That was a not so humble brag about a feature from earlier this year with Eric Van Rooyen. Very good feature, by the way. You guys could go check that out on the Google machine or wherever you check out your features. I will say, and this was a conversation I thought we were going to have on Golf Today earlier this week, but we did not. Is really what I wanted to dig into is where is the level of concern highest? And I'm going to mess up your headline bar here with this one, but where's your level of concern higher, Ricky Fowler or Will Zalatoris? As you pointed out, Ricky Fowler, all right, FedExCup ovals, that's good enough. As you just pointed out, Ricky Fowler is 93rd. So he's in a really, really bad spot, period, when it comes to the playoffs, and it's getting early late, the line I used last week. So you would think I would lean into Ricky. I'm going to go with Will. And for no other reason than I think Ricky can have one big week, and that's really all he needs at this point. And he started last week. Decent enough. You thought he was moving in the right direction in Detroit, didn't get it done over the weekend. If he can somehow piece together 4 rounds over the next few weeks, wherever that might be, I don't think he's playing this week. But with Will, it's much more concerning. And I know he tried to downplay whatever happened last week with the withdrawal. He said it was his good hip, just felt like he felt the pop, I believe is what he said. But when you're that young and you swing that way, and I'll leave the swing breakdown to Brandel Chambly, but I think it's been pretty well documented that he's putting a lot of force and a lot of pressure on both his lower back and his hips. And you've already had one surgery. You've already gone through one major procedure to put yourself back into this mix. So much talent, but that's very, very concerning to me, because anytime the red flag goes up on a player that young who swings that forcefully and that hard, it's very concerning.
Yeah, it's certainly a concern just given his injury history. When I texted with Will on Monday, he said that he was good after the hip scare. There's no change into his upcoming schedule. So I think that means the Scottish Open as well as the Open Championship. He said it was merely precautionary why he was pulling out of the Rocket Mortgage Classic, even though he was just six shots off the lead at the time. When you think big picture for Zalatoris, you would think he would love to secure his spot inside the top 50, make sure he's in all the biggest events in 2025, and then sort of take the fall to get right. Maybe have a couple of competitive reps in some of the fall events that he feels most comfortable in, but make sure that his body is in as good of a position as you could possibly have it at this point at the age of 27. This really has not been the year that Will Zalatoris expected. I remember he gave it a run at Riviera, thought he could win that signature event, had another good week at Bay Hill, but now is at a point where he has 7 straight tournaments outside the top 40. It was difficult to have expectations for him this year because he was coming off that major microdiscectomy procedure, and he's at a position, Rex, where he's like continually testing his body throughout the year. He's now withdrawn twice, once before a tournament, once during a tournament, for what he said was precautionary reasons. The Rocket Mortgage was his 4th consecutive week. He's sort of learning what his body can and can't take in what is the new normal for him. When you look at swing wise, and he certainly had to make some swing compensations because of the procedure and trying to prolong his career, he's about 3 miles an hour slower this year than what he was in 2021-2022 season when he was contending for major championships and playing some of the best golf of his career. His ball striking has certainly taken a step back. I'm not sure he's ever going to be an elite putter. He's been sort of experimenting this year with that long broom handle putter after having sort of a very unsightly and inconsistent stroke, at least in regular tournaments.
He could be good enough. We've seen him be good enough. Yeah.
When he won in Memphis, he tends to putt better. He tends to putt better in the biggest events on greens that are the slopiest and the fastest. That was sort of where he excelled in his creativity, his artistry could shine. But for me, the ball striking has tapered off significantly to a point where he's 51st in approach as opposed to being first a couple years ago. He's 65th off the tee, 11th a couple of years ago. I chalk that up to learning what his body can and can't do, making the changes that he needs to make. Again, that's why if you're Will Zalatoris, you'd love to get inside that top 50. You'd love to be safe. Shut it down for the majority of the fall. Maybe pop up for a week or two to test some things, but otherwise, get your game and your body in as good a position as it possibly can for when you hit Kapalua in early January.
And I think he'll have the opportunity to do that. I would expect him to play a handful of times. I'm thinking at least the Open Championship and then going into the playoffs. And then after that, at 38th, I believe is what you said, he'll have a little bit of a window to get healthy. That's kind of the beauty of this schedule where guys do now have the ability to go on the bench and have an off season and mend the body and mend the swing, everything else you can. To go to the broader question about the Bubble Boys, I think it will be interesting, and certainly Ricky Fowler should be in this conversation because all the pushback that we heard and felt and even talked about this year on the players who were getting the exemptions into the signature events. And they were mainly policy board player directors, and there was a lot of scrutiny on that, and there was a lot of criticism on that, including from us. I think that's only going to make them more difficult next year. So you look at a guy like Adam Scott, who's currently 69th on the points list and doesn't seem to be trending in the right direction. He won't be able to count on those for one of those sponsor exemptions into the big events next year. And it's going to leave him in a really awkward position. I would say the same thing probably about Ricky Fowler. They may get one or two, and there's sort of the conversation right now on the Player Advisory Council about limiting those exemptions to players. Like if you get two, maybe three, that's it. You can't expect any more than that. I think that's fair. I don't think anybody's going to push back on it. But this year's probably going to be a little bit more harsh than last year when it comes to those players who aren't inside the top 50.
If there is not a cap, if there's not some sort of maximum of 2 or 3 sponsor exemptions, which again seems perfectly fair to me. If Adam Scott and Webb Simpson were getting 4 and 5 throughout the 2024 season, you have to imagine the sponsors and PGA Tour execs who will be eager to make sure that Ricky Fowler, who remains a fan favorite, is getting those spots in the signature events, and deservedly so. He remains that popular. Last week in Detroit, Rex, is where Akshay Bhatia made a big move, cracking for the first time the top 12 in the U.S. President's Cup standings. He's all the way up to 12th. If you look right now on who would make the U.S. team with, again, slightly less than 2 months to go until qualifying ends, that's after the BMW Championship, where 6 players make it on points, and then American captain Jim Furyk will have 6 picks to make. Right now, on the U.S. side, that would be Scotty Scheffler, Xander Schauffele, Colin Morikawa, all very good. All you would expect to make, to earn a number of points. Wyndham Clark not playing his best at the moment. Patrick Cantlay has not won in nearly 2 years. And Sahith Theegala, a rising young star. That makes a very good 6. Where it gets very interesting, though, is the players who are currently occupying positions 7 through 12. That's Tony Finau, Max Homa, Brian Harman, Akshay, Chris Kirk, and Russell Henley. What are your thoughts on what the American team would look like right now? And who are some players either inside that top 12 or just outside that you'd be targeting if you're Jim Furyk and would like to see a little bit more?
I was watching the early round coverage last week from Detroit on ESPN Plus, and I believe it was Mark Carnival, who I have a lot of respect for, but they were having a similar conversation. And his argument was for the 6 picks, essentially. So his argument was just go 7 through 12. And I see where he's coming from.
The point of being a captain, shape the team that you want.
Exactly. That's the point I was just about to make. And if it's Carney, if it wasn't you, I apologize, whoever it was. I disagree with you. And like, look, we can go down and start what do you call picking nits? Is that the way you put it? And Tony Finau, it would fit into that team well. Certainly Max Homa, you would think would fit into that team well. I'm not sure Brian Harman, you can make an argument outside. The way Akshay is playing right now, he'd be a pretty easy pick. So you've already made it through the first 3 or 4. The conversation is going to happen is 10, 11, 12. And nothing against Chris Kirk or Russell Henley, who is 11 and 12. This is going to be tough for you. This is going to be a bulldog rabbit hole that you're about to go down, because after that, you run into some interesting picks like Justin Thomas, who's not playing his best golf, but he's currently 14th on that list. And I don't know how you leave him off that team as of right now. And I'm not saying that could change. I'm not saying that I'm not making the argument for Justin Thomas after making the argument that he should not have been a pick last year. But I'm just basing it on what we see of the team right now. A lot can change, but man, there's no way I'm going to just leave it to just pick the next 6 guys. Sure, I'm sure they could do fine. We all know the U.S. record in this particular event is pretty good. You're going to have the advantage for whatever reason going into Royal Montreal. You're going to be the heavy favorite. But there's a reason why they've decided to give captain 6 picks. Build the team the way you want it. And I think the captain this time around, Jim Furyk, will do that.
I absolutely think that Jim Furyk will do that. He's still part of the establishment with Davis Love and Tiger and Steve Stricker. They have, and Zach Johnson, like they have their guys. They have the known commodities. And I don't think he'll stray all that far from that. Remember when Jim Furyk was the 2018 U.S. Ryder Cup captain, he could not have picked more known quantities in Bryson DeChambeau, Phil Mickelson, Tiger Woods, etc. for that team. You would think the big names, the Sam Burns, the Justin Thomases, even the Jordan Spieths, if he can show some sort of form over the next 2 months, would certainly garner some sort of attention. If we are, Rex, picking nits, Brian Harman has only one top 10 since the Players' Championship. You can't pick Chris Kirk right now. He has just one top 10 finish since Kapalua.
You are putting yourself in a bulldog rabbit hole, aren't you?
I know. This is a very tough position for me to be. Russell Henley won at Mayakoba in 2022, and yet he's never really sniffed an American team. It's uncertain how he would sort of fit in there. To me, like Akshay is a absolute slam dunk. The sort of player that you would want to build around. He's 22 years old. He's playing great golf. He's been in the heat of battle in the major championships this year. You have to feel very good. I think this year, perhaps more than any other, is right for a guy to get hot at the right time. If you think back to Lucas Glover last year, winning 2 playoff events and like crashing the team, and if you're Jim Furyk, preferably it's a guy perhaps not of
Lucas didn't make the team.
Lucas Glover's age, but someone like a Will Zalatoris, a Nick Dunlap, a Jake Knapp, players of that ilk, someone who feels like they could be a building block for the future. Again, that's not a knock on someone of Lucas Glover's age. If he plays well enough, then he certainly earns to have a spot on the team. But the President's Cup historically for the Americans has been sort of a spot where you can break these guys in. I think back to Max Homa at Quail Hollow, who was given a spot on the team and then performed exceedingly well. And then he was the leading point getter for the U.S. last year in Rome. You would hope a similar situation could pan out for an Akshay, maybe a Dunlap, a Zalatoris, and get those guys in the mix.
Tom Hoagie's playing very good golf. I know he's not in that category that you just referred to. He's not one of those young guys that you always seem to lean into. But there's plenty of really good options. I'll even go as deep as like Eric. You look at Eric Cole. There's last year's Rookie of the Year. Probably hasn't.
Cam Young's 18th.
Cam Young. I mean, we sort of wore that conversation out on Monday. But look, I'm not quite sure I would make Cam Young a pick right now unless he promised me he would smile at least once during the week of the matches. But that seems wildly unlikely. But man, Chris Hack is on line 1. He'd like a word with you about those picks.
Tough. It would be absolutely devastating leaving 3 Bulldogs who are inside the top 12.
3? I think you left 4 on the table.
Harman, Kirk, Henley, Sepp Straka is actually on the European Ryder Cup team, even though he has moved from Vienna to Valdosta. Rex, at this point of the podcast, I actually feel bad for those who are listening to us on Spotify, iTunes, wherever it is that they receive their podcast. Because if you're watching on YouTube, we're about to trot out some technology that we never have before on this Golf Channel podcast with Rex and Lab. I'm going to defer to you first because you've been away from home. You've been pounding the pavement This PGA Tour Saudi deal that you've been chasing after has not quite come to fruition. That did not keep you from being at the Travelers Championship for a couple of days. Your family misses you dearly. But in the meantime, you have made an investment in your golf game. Not just the woods that you'll be getting tested for on Friday. Thank you, Tina, from Titleist. But you have also purchased a launch monitor for your backyard. Do you mind explaining to us what your goals are here at the age of 57?
So it's really not for me. And it's turned out more for me than I bought it for the middle son. Cole is his name. You refer to him as Trevor because he has long hair like Trevor Lawrence, your favorite quarterback for your bad team. I bought it for him because he wanted to do some speed training. And from everything I spoke with a couple of folks on the PGA Tour, Todd Anderson sort of helped me out with this. Chris Como helped me out because I asked, what's the right way to do this? Because I'm certainly not the expert. And he goes, you have to get a launch monitor, get a decent one, because you have to be able to quantify it. You're trying to get to speeds that are functional, because you start talking about functional speed. Yeah, you can swing it really, really fast, but the ball's going to go everywhere. And so he and I have kind of gone through this together. And essentially, he works at a golf course, so he and I will go to the range, but we do this every morning. I got a mat, I got a net for my back porch, which is too big. My wife hates it. Bunkmate absolutely says I've ruined the aesthetic on the back porch, but it's really, really cool because every day he and I can go out on the back porch and try to reach new speeds. Now I'm using a 7-iron because I'm trying to work my way up to the driver area. Thank you again, Tina, for Friday. Looking forward to that. So this is a 7-iron. And I've learned I really swung that hard. Anyway, what I've discovered is, can you run that back again?
Of course we can.
I'm testing your technology.
Just keep talking.
So if you look at it, the ball speed's 108. I'm trying to get to anything over 100 miles an hour ball speed. So that one was pretty good. The launch angle was a little bit low. Carry was less than I wanted it to. But the numbers that aren't up there, so I'm really looking at two numbers. One is ball speed. That's what you're sort of trying to quantify, what I'm trying to quantify. The other one is trying to figure out side spin. And so anything negative side spin is a hook. Anything positive is a fade or a slice, whatever the case may be. And if you can keep that in single digits, then your dispersion is much better. So I've kind of learned more about golf in the last few months, as you can see right there from that. It's from Rapisado. It's a very cool launch monitor.
How much did you pay for this? Because you're supposed to be a man of the people, and if all of a sudden you're plunking down $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 for a launch monitor to do some speed training at the age of 57, that's certainly going to ruin your rep.
I think it was $600-$700 was it, and this is the
my God.
So, yes, it's $600-$700.
How much is Golf Channel paying you?
Yes, I know. I must make, and it comes with a little stand, and it's got the app. I was just able to email you that video very, very easily. It's easy to work with. You can keep all your swings, all your data, so you can go back and see how you can do it. So, and this is not a paid advertisement, unfortunately, because we don't have paid advertisements.
Still working on that one.
Anyway, you, on the other hand, decided to go another route, and you got your first lesson ever today? Yesterday.
Yes. First lesson ever. If it looks like, if you guys are following along on YouTube, if it looks like I'm sweatier or redder than usual, it is because I had about an hour and a half lesson earlier today. This is actually funny. This is the first golf lesson. I'm 37 years old. I've been playing golf since I was probably 7 or 8 years old. Do you guys remember those old Golf Channel Academy shows? Like they used to have like Jim Flick and Butch and Jim McClain. Like that's how I learned how to play golf, was watching those in addition to Golf Channel's like playing lessons with the pros. And I'm a very visual learner, and I would just sort of mimic the movements that I was seeing. And so I know enough about the golf swing to be dangerous. You know, I'm not trying to qualify for any sort of US Mid-Am, but now my wife's gotten into it. I got her lessons, and I don't feel like sucking any longer. I've been battling a horrific two-way miss, and to the point where I'm losing 4 or 5 golf balls every time I play. Some are off the planet left, some are off the planet right. And so I enlisted Patrick at Marsh Landing, my club here in Ponte Vedra, for my very first lesson. And we are trying to work Rex on basically a fairway finder shot that I will use every single time I hit driver, in which I'm teeing it lower, aiming a little bit left, and sort of pinching it and hitting peeler fades that start left and sort of drift right. It is not a shot that comes naturally to me. I'm going to play the video for those of us here following along on YouTube to get a sense of what I'm trying to do. But my upper body pulls away from a target. It's a very unathletic, visually unappealing move that I've clearly been doing for the past 30 years. And now I'm trying to break it out of my swing. Here, take a look. Again,
seeing that down the line. Where you have a tendency of coming from the inside. You have a bit of a draw swing.
I have a draw swing that, again, produces a horrific two-way miss. My biggest issue is at impact, I'm coming out. And so if I time it perfectly, I'll hit it well. If I don't, I'm flipping. If I don't, I'm coming out and under it. I certainly have something to work on for this July 4th weekend. I have blisters all over my hands. I'm sweaty. I feel emaciated. I feel dehydrated. That's the hardest I've ever worked in a 90-minute period. But I at least have a foundation moving forward. I've always been, even in the times that I was playing great golf, shooting low to mid 70s, I would still have like a big lost ball in there somewhere. It was always lurking. It was always hiding.
You and Tiger, the big miss?
Very uncomfortable. Would love to just weed that out. Prayers for Lav. It's, I believe, trending now on Twitter. Feel free to follow along.
And I'm sure their comments are going to be so kind for both of us this week after they see these videos.
We don't care about your golf swing. I turned it off at the 24-minute mark. I can't wait to read that one over and over again. You are leaving, Rex, for Scotland on Sunday. What are you doing in the interim before you set sail for your 4-week European vacation?
My wife, bunkmate, and my oldest son just earlier this week flew to Scotland. They were already over there. They're already enjoying themselves, enjoying the weather and the best that Scotland has to offer. I leave, as you pointed out, on Sunday. You and I will be doing Sunday night's podcast. I believe I'll be in the airport in Atlanta, so I'm sure that'll be easy and seamless, and we won't have any interruptions at all. But in the interim, I am home with the 2 younger boys, and he and I, the 3 of us are having nothing but boys weekend. Every single night, I'm doing something. Last night, it was pulled pork tacos. Tonight, I think it's going to be hibachi on the Blackstone, and we're just going to make the most of the men's week without having bunkmate around.
That does sound absolutely glorious. I'm sure the beers and the barbecue will be flowing. Again, heading up to Reynolds for a little bit of golf, doing some ribs and barbecue chicken. My brother's coming over as well. It should be great. July 4th holiday. I'm sure I'll be sweating like a pig in Georgia as well. Wishing you guys at home a happy July 4th and a safe holiday weekend. Again, we'll be back on Sunday night for the recap podcast live from the Delta Sky Lounge. Thank you, Delta, for your service. Feel free to sponsor us if you do feel inclined. Please, folks, be kind in the comments. We know we're not trying to qualify for the mid-am here. We're just trying to improve our lives a little bit better. We're trying to be a little less suicidal on the golf course and enjoy this great game a little bit more. Please, kindness in the comments. In the meantime, you guys know the drill. NBCSports.com/golf for all the latest news, notes, and updates. We'll talk to you guys on Sunday night. Thanks for listening. Thanks for the support.
Shout out to David in Scotland.